So yes, there are basically two issues that you have to work with in designing non-local consciousness experiments. One is you have to really think through the variables that are in play in your experiment. And one of the variables is blindness, and the other is randomization. Mm-hmm. So what you're trying to do is to design an experiment in which the only way the experiment can be accomplished successfully, that you can get a positive result, is that non-local consciousness was the source of the information. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the basic principle.
Right.
So you want to eliminate things like cueing, even body language cueing. I mean, there are lots of studies that show, for instance, that the attitude and expectation of the researcher has a very strong effect on the performance of the person who is the percipient in the experiment.
And that's known across all of psychology.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. It's all through. So you have to design the experiment so that all of those subtle nuances get dealt with. Mm-hmm. I personally prefer to do triple-blind experiments.
And what does that mean?
Well, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. A typical experiment, most experiments that people do are double-blind. That is, at the time that you're doing the experiment, both the person who is the participant, who's producing the non-local data, and the researcher who's working with them are blind to whatever the right answer is. Mm-hmm. That's a double-blind experiment. A single-blind experiment would be the researcher knows, but the recipient doesn't know. Mm-hmm. I prefer triple-blind experiments. For the reason I cited, it just obviates another level of criticism. And so a typical remote viewing experiment that I would do would be to ask you to describe a target which, at the time you're describing it, has not yet been selected. Mm-hmm. So nobody knows what the answer is. So you have to create blindness so that it cannot be claimed that somebody knew the answer and might, through the wink of an eye or the posture of their body or something they said or, I don't know.
Subtle cueing.
Yeah, some kind of subtle cueing that they could have conveyed the right answer. I mean, I can remember when I first got into doing this kind of research, I remember going to a professional research meeting, and there was a claim made that people were climbing into the attic of the building and drilling through the ceiling, and that they were somehow alerting the participant.
That's the famous criticism made by C.E.M. Hansel of the early research by J.B. Rhine and and Pratt.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. The Pratt-Pierce experiments.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it sounds preposterous,
right?
But
he kept repeating it over and over.
Absolutely.
Again, because he found a little, I think, a knothole in the floor or something of the ceiling above.
Yeah, exactly. So you just eliminate all that. Mm-hmm. It's much easier to conceptualize the experiment and go through it and think, okay, then I'm going to do this, and then I'll do that, and it'll be in this environment, and all of that, and deal with all that kind of nonsense at the front end so that you don't have some guy standing up where you present your paper saying, well, there was a knothole in the ceiling, and, it could have been, I don't say that it happened, but it could have happened, and so you just eliminate all that stuff.
Yeah.
So first, you want to create really well understood and well defined and secure blindness. And the second thing is you want to create randomization. And there's a number of companies that produce random number generators, and you have to do a little research on the web to find out which is the correct one, but it's not terribly hard to do.
Because if your random number generator is biased, a critic will say that somehow your percipients were able to detect that bias, and so it's not really non-local consciousness, it's a question of subliminal computation or something of that sort.
Exactly.